Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and today we are in conversation with Martyn Coupland, and we're going to talk a little bit around the journey to using DevOps. So, hi Martyn, thanks so much for joining me today on this In Conversation With. It's only my second episode, so bear with me. Probably going to have some technical glitches as we go, but thanks for joining me so much. It's great to have you here. I don't know if for the purposes of our viewers, if you want to just say hello, introduce yourself, and tell everybody what you do.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me, first of all. Appreciate being here. I'm a principal technology consultant with Ensono. They're a US-based company that actually do everything from mainframe all the way to public cloud. But my role there is really around cloud native and DevOps on the Azure side of public cloud. Although as a business, we do AWS as well.
Sure. Yeah.
My focus is on Azure. Community-wise, I'm a Microsoft MVP in Azure as well. I'm also a DevOps ambassador with the DevOps Institute, so do a number of talks, obviously as an MVP and with the DevOps Institute around various different subjects when it comes to DevOps. But primarily, one of my passions when it comes to DevOps is really getting people's realization that it is not just technology that drives DevOps. It is around so much more than just technology.
No, absolutely. I think we've chatted over social media over the last couple of months, but personally, I've been on my own little journey. I suppose for where I work is kind of where it's probably fair to say we're a little bit behind the curve in terms of DevOps, but I kind of say that kind of tongue in cheek because the customers I deal with, they always seem to kind of just have this bit of an unknown, right? What is DevOps? How do we implement it? What do we do? Does it mean some technology? Does it mean a culture change? And so personally, I've kind of tried reading a few. I've read the DevOps for Dummies book. I've read the Phoenix project. I'm on the Unicorn project now. So there's so much collateral. In fact, I've even watched some of your sessions, Martyn. So I mean, the information out there is vast on DevOps, and it's certainly not a new term. What's it like for you when you go in and you deal with your customers? Do you go in specifically to talk DevOps, or are you in there from an Azure perspective and then conversations go into it? How do you see the land at the minute, Martyn? I personally, I see a little bit of a mixed bag. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, it is, to be honest, and some of it is really down to the organization I work for as well, right? So we're not traditionally known as an organization that would do cloud native and with that association DevOps. So we're starting to get into conversations now where we're in pre-sales conversations potentially, or we're just talking about some projects that we're about to work on for a client, and then all of a sudden they'll say something, and I'll just come back with, well, so what does that mean for DevOps? How does DevOps work at your organization? What are you doing? And quite often that completely derails the meeting for starters. And depending on the level of people you're talking to, depends on how that conversation goes. I personally like those conversations early on in the whole engagement cycle that we go through, mostly because early on in the cycle, we're speaking to executives at organizations. And for me, that is the level you need to be talking to make your DevOps project successful. It's okay getting the technical people on board. It's okay getting them to understand the technical benefits of what DevOps brings to them, some new tooling, some great skills for their careers, faster delivery, all of these great things. But what does it mean from a business perspective? And I try and explain DevOps to execs without actually mentioning the word DevOps or Agile. That's really the art to it. It's around trying to make sure that they understand that what we do in DevOps is around making sure that technology is set up as a business unit to achieve their business goals. And one of the examples that I always talk about is, and it's quite a crude example, if I'm honest, from a business perspective, it's actually pretty flawed, but people get it and get the analogy. One of the things I like to say is, imagine if you did 4 releases a year.
Mhm.
And every release was when you maximize revenue within your business. And until you made your next release, your revenue depreciates. What you
Sure.
end up with is a sawtooth graph of all your releases and revenue going up and down. So to start with, what if we could double the amount of releases a year? What if we could double the number of times you release new features?
Mhm.
Effectively, you could double your revenue because you're making a double the number of releases. If it was a one-to-one relationship, that's what you could do.
Yeah.
But you still have these problems of peaks and troughs. So now we can start to apply the smart things that we do as part of DevOps. We can apply automation, CI, CD, process automation, just fixing broken processes. They don't even have to be automated. And what that does is instead of having peaks and troughs, that starts to smooth out that graph.
Mhm.
So that revenue doesn't dip as much between releases and it ends up being a wave instead of a sawtooth. And that's really one of the ways that I tend to use to try and engage executives in those early conversations to say,
Yeah,
look,
definitely. I
your
mean,
competitors are doing this.
it's one of those things, isn't it? That when you're in with a company or as a company, you're thinking about moving to this new way of working. Maybe if you've not dipped your toe in the water with DevOps, and yeah, it's just trying to realize what does that mean for your business. Now, I mean, if we roll that back a bit, how would you explain DevOps to an IT team that simply have just been run ragged for the last however many years and they've had no time to upskill, they've had no time to research what it is? How do you explain what DevOps means to typical operations people sat in an IT department? Maybe there are some dev teams in there, but let's just focus on that as maybe as an example. I don't know. How would you
Yeah.
explain it to a typical ops person, say, Martyn?
So ops is a great example because even in DevOps, ops are still the team that are left behind until near the end.
Mm.
But if you think of the value that operations bring to an organization, they have knowledge of not only how the application works, but how it works within the business. So it's okay for software you develop yourself internally because some of that stuff is more understood by the developers and may well be passed over, hopefully, as knowledge during releases. But they understand how people use that application probably more than the developers do.
Yeah, yeah, sure
Same when
thing.
it comes to commercial off the shelf software as well, right? And one of the challenges you have with things like cloud native technology, like containers and serverless, is that you actually remove some of that operational need from developers because it's so easy to deploy stuff directly to these instances. They don't
Mm.
need operations anymore.
Mhm.
But by including operations in those conversations and in your Scrum teams, if you're doing Agile, what you actually get is then the ability to make sure that all of that operational knowledge that they have, when's the best time to do maintenance, when's the best time to release updates,
Mm.
when's the best time to communicate downtime, what does disaster recovery mean for this application, how do we effectively back it up, how do people use the application in reality as opposed to how it was designed to operate.
Yeah.
All of that knowledge is valuable to developers. And if they're engaged at the beginning of the process through better collaboration and communication, the fundamentals of DevOps, that
Mm.
is what fundamentally starts to improve that process and bring what we generally know as adversaries in the tech world, developers and operations.
Mhm.
A team that's focused in developers on focusing on new features as fast as possible versus a team whose job it is to keep the lights on and slow down the pace. Fundamentally, this is how we get them to work better together. So a lot of people see operations teams as a challenge, I guess, is the short answer to that. But actually, you need to work with operations teams and explain how much value they add before uh, the release or before development even starts, and explain that, guess what, in a cloud native world, you still need to monitor, you still need to know when stuff isn't working, you still need to know how to back it up, you still need to know what disaster recovery and business continuity looks like. They don't go away just because we're deploying to something that can be redeployed in milliseconds. They are all still valid questions that operations have the answer to.
Absolutely, and you know what? I think even uh, even with the kind of the rise of new technologies, there's still that, distinct piece around, as a culture, as a business, as a department, you need to shift your mind. You need to shift the way that you work and understand that what you do today and how you do things today may not necessarily be the way that you need to do them going forward. And you almost need to be open-minded to, utilize and consume the technology and the processes, or adapt the processes that sit around you to do the best thing for your job. Because, I mean, with the rise of things like infrastructure as code, to deploy infrastructure now has become essentially a lot easier and a lot quicker with the ability to code. But traditionally, ops folk, they may be a whiz with a bit of bash script or some PowerShell, but typically they're not. Ooh, I say this, probably get a load of comments now saying, but typically, and be speaking very generalistic, ops folk aren't seen to be those kind of people that would generally learn a new language or learn a new way to code things, such as defining an ARM template or maybe doing some Terraform. Do you see that's where do you find that with your customers now in terms of upskilling, and those people that you speak with, maybe at that kind of IT ops level or dev level? Do you see that as a gap in skills that people should possibly be focusing on at the minute, or do you see that as a bit of an incline at the moment? How do you find that, Martyn?
To a degree, I absolutely agree with you, and some of that gap is, I think, brought on by how organizations implement DevOps. So I think it's their undoing in a lot of ways. If when you're starting your transformation journey, you spend some time focusing on what the roles and responsibilities are of people in your teams, great example is DevOps engineer. Right?
Yeah.
If you look at books like the Phoenix Project and you listen to the things that Gene Kim has to say, one of the most famous people in DevOps, as far as they're concerned, DevOps engineering isn't a thing at all. But it is, right? The reality is, it is. I see CVs and I see job adverts on LinkedIn all the time for DevOps engineers.
Yeah.
But what exactly is a DevOps engineer, and it does differ per environment, per customer. And I think one of the fundamentals you need to understand if you're looking to hire DevOps professionals is, what is the difference between a DevOps engineer and an infrastructure engineer? Because they're actually very similar roles. And I think the main difference between the two is that when you're in DevOps, you have to have those core soft skills. You have to be effectively able to communicate, collaborate with others, work well with other teams outside of your comfort zone. You have to be able to take requirements, maybe not understand the technology, but go figure it out and work what it is. That's what often separates between architect and consultant in a lot of organizations. Is consultants can generally have those conversations and just go figure out what's what, and so that's what the best architects can do as well, because you've seen enough configurations between all of the customers you've spoken to that you can go figure out what the requirements are pretty easily and just go validate some of your technical understanding along the way. But back to the point that you were making, I think skills wise, some of it's on recruiters and some of it's on the companies that are posting these adverts out as well. I saw an advert, well, it must have been before Christmas now, for someone who was looking for someone with 12 years Kubernetes experience.
Yeah, great.
And of course, it's not been out 12 years.
Yeah.
So, there's these kind of things, and you see all of these must-haves and desirables, and there's pretty much every scripting and programming language that's ever been invented on there.
Yeah, and then they want to pay them bottom dollar normally, isn't it? And that's the thing they're expecting. Yeah, exactly. I think it's very interesting state of affairs, I find, at the moment. Obviously, doing the work that I do, my background. So, I mean, not that this is about me, but when I kind of started learning myself about DevOps, my background was for 7 years when I left college. For 7 years, I worked for a manufacturing firm. I wasn't in an IT position, and I got to work with flow lines, with product going up and down the flow line. And I reflect back on this now quite a lot, because at the time, the business I worked for were implementing all these new, say new, these Japanese methodologies, this lean initiative, these 5S's, Kaizen, just in time. There were all these kind of initiatives going on. And as I read through the Phoenix Project, Gene Kim and et al., and now I'm reading the Unicorn Project, it's just so, it's humorous because I look back on that, and I was lucky to kind of have that little bit of background where when I moved into IT then, I was almost doing a little bit of that work without me realizing it was going to be called DevOps, sort of 10, 15 years later. And I think for a lot of people, maybe that's the key is for people to understand this isn't really a new thing. This kind of thing that we now call DevOps it's been around for years in various different names and forms. And it's really, my understanding is really this whole kit bag of ways of being, including culture and changing the way that you work and who you speak to. But I think when you try and translate that, roll all of that back down to somebody that's sat in, an IT pro position at the moment, sat doing their 9-to-5 job, and then hearing maybe a lot of this noise going on about DevOps, I saw something on social media. Is DevOps overrated? And and arguably, a term can be used too much to the extent that people get sick of it. I don't know, but it's just interesting to see, really, from a skilling point of view. What it took me personally was to read up on what do various people see DevOps. Reach out to experts like yourself, Martyn. Watch some of your webinars and your blogs, and piece it all together. And then you kind of make it what you make it in your position that you're currently working in, almost. And I don't know if you see the same thing as me there, or before we kind of move on to the technology part of DevOps, are you seeing a similar thing?
I completely agree with what you've just said there, completely. I would go as far as saying, I guess, for anyone that's listening who thinks DevOps confuses the hell out of me, if you ever think back to some of the things that you just said there, John, right? I know people in technology now that are working in DevOps roles that started in the manufacturing industry, where they were doing, like you say, things like Kaizen, they were doing things like Lean decades ago. And it's actually because of those things and the Japanese car industry that went so far ahead of the world with their automation that they were able to produce tens at the time, now hundreds of cars a day, while the Western world was still hand manufacturing every single car that they made. And that is why the Japanese car industry got so far ahead of everywhere else and exploded, because they were so advanced when it comes to technology. But if you look, you're exactly right. If you look at DevOps today, if you break it down to its core basics and fundamentals, it's around how do we better work with other people, and how can we better communicate with those people, and how can we take all of these different principles like Lean, Agile, how can we take some elements
So wasn't
of technology?
Lean, Martyn, wasn't Lean about removing waste? So when you're doing a task, remove the bit that really is adding no value. So hence the term Lean.
Exactly. It's about looking at your processes and making them lean. Remove, exactly like you say, removing the waste. It's looking at those parts of your process that is downtime that adds no value to the overall end goal. And if it can be removed, then remove it.
Yeah. One of the extracts I liked actually was I forget what materials I was reading, but literally, if you're doing a task and you're doing it without really understanding why you're doing it, and you can't put your finger on it, just stop doing it. And if it really needs to be done, you'll soon find out, because somebody will come shouting at you. And I thought, that's just so true. How many times a day, even in our daily working sort of regime, do we, subconsciously just go to our email, check our email, do this, do that. There's even if we looked at our day-to-day working, there's probably a lot of things we currently do that, arguably we don't. How many times do we pick up these devices? We pick them up, we check them, we check them. Yeah, and when you try and apply those kind of concepts to the business world, straight away, okay, so we talked about process and defining our process. We've talked about culture and the way that we need to speak with each other and understand each other on maybe a different level. Try not to be so combative maybe between departments, and find friends, realize that things should be a bit more of an open book and communicate. And I suppose the third thing is tooling. So from an IT pro perspective, it's great hearing all this great stuff about DevOps, but what do you generally tend to talk about more than not, and how do your conversations go with customers in terms of what that technology aspect of DevOps means?
Yeah, so for me, the conversations I have with clients, obviously they're in Azure to start with, or they're looking at moving to Azure. That's why I'm engaged with them in the first place. But what I try and make people realize is you will commonly hear people talk about tools like Jenkins and Puppet, Chef, all of these different tools. There's absolutely hundreds of them, right, to do various different things. But actually, one of the messages I want to get across to people is that you don't need to invest in all of that tooling and all of the additional training that comes with it, all of the additional integrating it with your existing environment and investments that you've already made. You can do it with native Microsoft tooling, most of it in Azure. And the great example that I have with that is probably when it comes to containers, right? Deploying to Azure Kubernetes service. Most people are looking at or thinking at containers quite seriously now for lots of different ways. So, there's the slide that we've got that I want to go through that really talks about what this tooling is and really what value it can bring and how you can go end to end looking at all of this stuff without really touching anything and just using technology that is there at your fingertips already.
Oh, sure, yeah.
One of the things you'll notice from this to begin with is these are all Microsoft tools, right? So now GitHub is owned by Microsoft. The next item along there is a pipeline from Azure DevOps. Then we have the container registry. We have the Kubernetes icon there. And then we have Key Vault, Azure Active Directory, and then Azure Monitor. And if you just think about some of those tool names and think about the infinity wheel of DevOps and where some of those tools that are more commonly talked about align with, you can fit a lot of these into that process. So first things first is around security, right? Security is everywhere. And without getting into DevSecOps too much, which is a whole different subject altogether. And I guess for the record, I think is an overused marketing term. We should be just doing security. We shouldn't need to be having a set of technologies, processes, and tools to do it. We should be doing this kind of stuff already. But with DevOps and with the ability to shift a lot of the stuff you do to the left, becomes the need to have to identify vulnerabilities as early as possible. Because once this code is picked up, it can potentially be deployed all the way to production with just a peer review. So you have to have tools along the way that do some of that interaction for you. And with things like CodeQL, GitHub Advanced Security, and also Dependabot, you can look to identify and then remediate issues in dependencies at commit of your code. We can use tools like secret scanning, looking for hard-coded usernames and passwords, IP addresses, server names, all of these things that we curse developers for 4 years down the line when we migrate a server and it no longer works because someone's hard-coded an IP address, all of these things. We don't want them in source code, right? That's not the place to put them at all. They need to be in an appropriate place, which is the secrets vault. Moving across to how you build and release this stuff, right? So Azure DevOps has a great feature in Azure Pipelines. It gives us the ability to build our container images with complete traceability. What do I mean by traceability? The boards feature of Azure DevOps, where you can track work items and bugs, features, tasks. They can all be linked back to your commits, even if those commits are in GitHub. All of the work items and all of the artifacts of every image can be linked together so that going backwards in time, you can look at a specific release and say, these were all of the work items, these were all of the bugs that were fixed by this release. These are all the commits that make up this release. And obviously, these are the people that made these commits. These are the people who reviewed all of those commits as part of the internal code reviews. You have full traceability of exactly what's happening.
So, I mean, just going back to the pipelines bit there a minute, Martyn. So, in Azure DevOps, the common way that we define these pipelines is through another technology or a script or a code, whatever you want to call it, YAML, yeah?
Yeah.
In terms of learning how we do that. And funny enough, I've just done a quick blog article about building a first pipeline and whatnot, and trying to use the classic editor, which was really about drag and dropping boxes on in various different ways. So creating your kind of your agent jobs and then specifying tasks. I mean, it literally is that, isn't it? So for somebody who's completely new to this, an Azure or an Azure DevOps pipeline is, if you take a script or a way of something that you deploy an application, you break that down into each of its constituent parts, and you can literally build those series of tasks up, yeah, in a pipeline, and that's what we're talking about. Isn't that right, Martyn? So
that's exactly it, right? If you want to make it as basic as possible, a pipeline's a workflow, and continuous integration is a build process. How do you get your application from source code to executable fundamentally?
Yeah.
And then continuous delivery is how do we take that executable and deploy it to our execution venue, be that Azure, AWS, GCP, even on-prem, if you want to. And the pipeline is the technology that automates that process for us. It's our automation engine.
No, sorry to break your flow there. I thought it was interesting. It's something I've been looking at and talking with a few of my customers about lately is certain processes and how we automate them. And it's great to see how much integration there is in those pipelines. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different connections that can be made. I mean, right the way down to just simply running a bit of Bash script or some PowerShell script or Azure CLI, whatever it may be. It's that magic word, isn't it? Is what do you want? We can do it. You know, it's
that's exactly it.
Such a powerful integration tool. But yeah, sorry to break your flow, Martyn. It's
No, that's fine. And what's great about this as well, and what's great about Azure DevOps, and one of the reasons I love it so much as a tool to use is not only can you deliver on whatever platform you want to deliver to, you can also build whatever language you're building. So whether that's iOS for your Apple applications, you can run builds against iOS environments. So your agents can be on Macs. They can also be on Linux, Windows. They can be on-prem servers if you wanted to. You can install build agents on on-prem servers if you need on-prem resources to be able to complete your build process.
Yeah.
Particularly useful if you have hardware in your environment that you need. So
is that for like long-running builds? I think, isn't there some kind of a limitation with some of the agent jobs in terms of timing with the cloud-hosted agent jobs? So I think they give you the option to build it on physical kit on-prem to, you know, if you've got big builds, I suppose, and they take a long time to build, I guess, is one of the good reasons there.
That is absolutely a use case, right? You can also put them on scale sets on VMs in Azure as well. So if you prefer to use technology up in Azure, you can still do that. One of the customers I'm working with at the minute, they make imaging technology. So whenever they run a build, they actually need physical hardware connected.
Okay.
So we just installed one of the build agents on a physical machine on premises that has the hardware plugged in, so it can run its validation tests and then carry on with the process.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So it still works exactly the same. One of the things that I really like is, so you talked about the drag and drop interface versus defining in YAML. I was actually a little bit sad when the focus went away from the drag and drop interface for a little bit, because I really like it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really love about what it brings coming in YAML is your pipeline can then be part of your code, and it can be part of your repository. You talked about infrastructure as code earlier on as well, right? You can now be in a position where your infrastructure, the definition of that infrastructure is defined in code. The pipeline that builds it and delivers it is also in code, and the application that runs on all of those technologies is also in code. They're all in the same repository.
And do you know what, Martyn? I think we probably want to pause right there, because sometimes with these kind of talks, I guess people can just hear words and go, oh, what does that mean? And when you break that, exactly like you said, I'm going to repeat what you just said, because it's such a powerful thing, is that You define your infrastructure as code. You define the pipelines, the mechanism to deliver that as code. So in theory, if ever you're in a DR or a business continuity thing that you've got to put in place, you've got it all there in your repository. So in theory, you could architect your environment, your infrastructure, to literally be spun up by the click or the trigger of a GitHub repo or some kind of a Git repo. I just found when I learned about that and was reading about that, I just found that almost so overwhelmingly brilliant that it's probably, it needs to be stated that, wow, it's absolutely right in removing those kind of drag and drop bits. It'd still be nice if we had one that could define the YAML that could then be dropped, because I'm forever getting those indentations wrong and looking at the squiggly lines and pulling my hair out. But yeah, it just goes to show, doesn't it, how much of a powerful set of tools is available in Azure DevOps.
Yeah, absolutely. The tool set is really powerful, and I think the power of having all of those things together, like you say, means, does that mean we don't need DR environments anymore? Because I can literally go into my repository and run the pipeline, and off it goes to somewhere else. These are all of the things that start to happen when you start to get into these more advanced technologies.
Do you know what, Martyn? I constantly think, the amount of time, I look at how I learn things personally, the amount of time it took me to learn things, and the journey that I went on to do what I do and my other parts of my job, it was a significant amount of work, just to upskill in this area and to gain that knowledge. And my feeling is that there's a lot of people out there that, just simply don't have the time to read up on these things. So hopefully these kind of videos kind of will show that, look, it's there. You just got to try and look. And my other kind of observation in learning this stuff for myself is, you can talk about it and it all sounds very big and clever, but when you start doing it and coding it and playing with it for yourself, it's so much more obvious. So I think that the key principle is, there's loads of labs and demos out there, is to jump on in and get cracking with some of the Azure. I think, don't they have some labs, Martyn? DevOps, they've got a few labs you can kick off and start having a little play with, isn't there?
There's quite a lot. Yeah, I forget the URL actually. And the worst time, it'd be great to mention it. There's a couple of great tools out there where you can actually use templates to put into your Azure DevOps instance.
Well, do you know what? One of the things, sorry to chip in there. One of the templates that I did see that Microsoft has set up is the Cloud Adoption Framework template, which it was just the work process. So it put you in a whole lot of Azure board sort of issues and tasks and features and things like that, or I forget what they call them now in Azure boards. But they put them all in there really as a roadmap, and it was great because it kind of gets you onto, if you're new to the cloud, using the Cloud Adoption Framework, but also using Azure DevOps to kind of manage your journey, almost program manage using the board. So it's great how Microsoft are trying to pull all of these bits together and show the technology in amongst giving a bit of a service to a customer as well, which is what I found great.
Definitely, and of course there's the Visual Studio Marketplace as well, which is where you get all of your pipeline extensions to interact with third-party tools that you might have in your environment. So if you have made existing investments in some of those tools and technologies, you don't have to dump them all together. You can use things like SonarQube to do your static analysis of your code. All of these sorts of things you can still interact with. If you use ServiceNow, you can interact with ServiceNow to create RFC records, change records, all of these kind of things as gates within your process, so that you can wait for the request to come back as approved before the pipeline carries on executing. So it's very flexible, and there's lots of things you can add, and new things are being added all the time. It's really, really good.
No, absolutely.
So, just moving on to the next bit really, which is around container images, right? So in ACR, we call it the Azure Container Registry. When we integrate with Azure Security Center, your containers are then automatically scanned for vulnerabilities. Right? And I've heard some customers say, yeah, but does it really do a good job? you know, it highlights all of these things, but what can we do with them? You know, all of this kind of stuff. It's actually a Qualys engine that's used in the background. So it's like high quality technology that Microsoft are using to be able to do this. And for if you're not with the way Microsoft engineers stuff these days, if you're used to like some of the things that used to happen in Windows 98 and Windows ME days,
Yeah.
right? Those days are long gone from a product perspective. When it comes to Microsoft, what's released now is high quality, and they don't shy away from making use of third-party tools if those third-party tools do an appropriate job. So
So
one
are
to
you
note
saying
for
then,
this one
Martyn,
is
that Microsoft have got stuff built into the Azure Security Center that what automatically scans images that are stored in the container registry?
Yep. So as soon as you upload, it will go do a vulnerability scan on that actual image itself, and you will get a report in Azure Security Center of the CVE ID numbers that it's found and whereabouts they are in the container.
So you might want to go and re-image or rebuild
Check it.
your image and patch it up. Yeah, I mean it's phenomenal. And is that as the free version of Security Center, or is it one of the premium plans? Do you know?
I think it's one of the premium ones.
Yeah, but it's worth checking. I mean, it's a great little feature, isn't it? That just straight out of the box, just simply the fact that you're storing your container images in Azure. If you've enabled a security center and you're paying, I mean, we'll probably have to check if it's a paid for service. I presume it is. You get all of that vulnerability scanning built in. It's phenomenal, really, isn't it?
And this is the thing, right? It's yes, it costs you money, but is the money it costs to run it better than paying money for another solution, running it standalone from the whole process and having it not integrated with the rest of the tool set? If the answer is yes, then so be it. Go off and do that. No one will stop you from doing that. But if the answer is no, then there's a solution here that will let you do exactly that.
Absolutely.
So next into AKS itself, this one's a little bit of a cheat, but I talk about utilizing infrastructure as code and Azure policy to ensure compliance around your Kubernetes service or your Kubernetes cluster. And directly from the pipeline, you can interact with your AKS clusters straight out of the box. There's nothing you need to do. Configure the connection to your subscription, and it will see your clusters. You pick the one you want, and it will deploy straight away. And then add on top of that Azure policy to be able to secure the actual infrastructure itself. Make sure that if anyone modifies it, those changes are highlighted or rolled back to what they were, because we can either report or remediate in Azure policy. But Azure policy is a great way if you are in an industry that is regulated. So in the US, for instance, if you hold healthcare data, you're bound by HIPAA regulations. If you work for most government departments in the UK, you would need IL3 or higher compliance. There's also PCI DSS for card payments, ISO 27001. There's hundreds of them within there, and these are predefined policies that align to the technical controls of those compliance frameworks.
I jumped on one of the Microsoft Open Hacks a few months back now to do the enterprise scale Open Hack, and it's such great information that you can get out of those Open Hacks. But that enterprise scale specifically talked about landing zones. So being able to set up, so if you're going to deploy Kubernetes, you could set up a landing zone. You could deploy all of these policies that, like you say, if you define from some kind of a regulation perspective. I mean, Microsoft have literally got rows upon rows of policy sets, essentially, which kind of, I mean, they can be tweaked and changed, but they are there specifically to try and get you to a level of adherence with some kind of a regulatory body. If not, you can just use certain policies, can't you, for best practices, essentially, for lots of things. I mean, I did a chat recently with another guy from the community, so specifically about landing zones. So it's great to see that Kubernetes is allowing you to kind of just overlay all of that as your policy as well, which is fantastic to see how it all joins together, really, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, having an integrated story and technology is more important for me than having bells and whistles, right? If your integrated story solves 80% of the problem, then I would start to question whether you need that other 20% or not. If you do, fair enough, and solution it to do that. But if you
Challenge it,
can
isn't it? I
live
suppose
without it, then don't.
that's the message: is challenge it, isn't it? I'm in complete agreement with you, Martyn. I think I prefer to see things. I mean, it's different. You know, it's a difficult conversation sometimes to have with customers. Is sometimes customers see it as though they're putting all their eggs in one basket with one vendor. You know, and we know there's procurement rules and things like that that kind of deviate away from those kind of principles. So sometimes you can have a difficult conversation, but you know, when you roll it all back down, it's always better. My personal view is always better to be one vendor. Like you say, if you're hitting 80% of your requirements, is that 20% custom work? Is it something funny that you've got going on that you didn't realize you could put into that 80%? So, but I suppose the point is question it and challenge it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. So one of the next things is around key vault, right? So we talked about storing secrets in and scanning for them in source code earlier on. But what do you do with them once you've found them, right? So connection strings, keys, certificates, tokens, anything that you would deem a secret can be put into your key vault and your applications call them at runtime. So as a developer, you never know what the actual value of that secret is, regardless of what it is. So if you think of connection strings, that's a great one, right? Connection strings is really important. We connect to databases all the time in our applications. Depending on the type of connection string, that includes the password as well. They're stored in plain text in application config files. Move it into a key vault and use the reference framework to be able to reference the value from the key vault. Your application has an identity, a managed identity in Active Directory that it uses to be able to access the key vault, retrieve the secret, and use it in code. Your developers, your infrastructure teams never know what that value is, and that can be rotated automatically using automation. There's all sorts of things that you can do to further secure that. One of the things that I really love about Key Vault is even if you're an administrator on your Azure subscription, unless the policy of that Key Vault determines that you have access to list and read secrets, then you cannot, regardless of your permissions. That's a really good model to follow. And Key Vault should not be underestimated in terms of the value that it can bring to your organization.
Because it does a few things. Well, as you say there, I mean, you've got them on the screen: certificates, tokens, keys. It's not just a place to store sort of key value pairs, is it? It's quite a comprehensive product. Yeah.
And one of the great things I like about putting certificates in there is it puts the expiry date of the certificate in there. One of the long-standing problems every organization in the world has had at some point, a certificate's expired and no one's known about it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you think of some automation you can add onto the back of there to be able to read the expiration dates and let people know, or even automatically renew them if need be, there's lots of stuff you can do there. Lots of stuff. So just on authentication as well, right? Identity, authentication, and authorization are for me some of the fundamental parts of securing your applications, right? So you can use Azure AD to secure your applications, secure your whole environment. There's, as most people will know, Azure AD contains things like multi-factor authentication, amazing activity reporting, the ability to enforce things like conditional access based on different rules on certain devices, based on certain locations. All these things add, lots of security to your applications as well as the environment that they're running. And that, again, big topic that you could cover separately.
Absolutely, yeah, you're not wrong.
Lastly, but not least, is something that I think people forget in the cloud is the ability to collect and monitor telemetry. So you can use Azure Monitor, you can use things like application insights to monitor your applications and the infrastructure that it runs on in near real time. You can then provide quality gates back on your pipeline. And based on the monitoring data that comes out, you can then run release rollbacks based on monitoring data. So if your monitoring data starts firing off thousands of exceptions, you can roll it back to the last good configuration because we have that code in the repository. we have the commits that run that, we have the pipeline run that built it and released it, we can just rerun it again. We may even still have the image, depending on how your container images are configured and stored. So we can just redeploy that image. And one of the things that's great about containers is if they're architected, built, and deployed properly, that redeployment process should be seconds at most, meaning that the downtime, if you are experiencing it, is very, very limited. But with all that telemetry, if there are issues, that telemetry can be fed back to your developers, and they can use that telemetry to find out what the problem is and fix it, so that next time they release, it doesn't happen.
So I mean, from a monitoring perspective, I suppose what you're talking about there is potentially you can generate alerting, and obviously you can feed all the telemetry and metrics into, either keep it in Azure Monitor, or you can feed into kind of log analytics workspaces, and you can query that data on a mass scale, like you say. The app insights that can be enabled if you've got some web apps or web apps running containers. The list is pretty much endless, isn't it? From what I've seen in terms of monitoring, it's such another powerful part of the jigsaw that, you know, it's you've got all of these components, and you glue them together somehow to produce this marvel of wonder of a delivery of some form of an application or infrastructure.
Yeah, and I mean, individually, all of these features are incredible, right? But together, they're powerful. And that's really the key message, is that you can do some really clever things. You can do some really mature things from a technology perspective. But just linking it back to what we were talking about at the top of the conversation, right, earlier on, in my opinion, there's no point in doing all of this stuff from a technology perspective if you don't have the culture, the people, and the processes to back that up when it comes to DevOps. Right? It's all well and good having the technology, but you have to have the other three elements to make it successful.
Absolutely, Martin. That's thanks so much for that overview. I mean, it's great to kind of just see it there in one slide. Okay, we've dealt with it from a Microsoft perspective, looking at Microsoft products, but at the end of the day, we are on a Microsoft journey. Both of us are. So why wouldn't we? And as we said earlier, I mean that the fact that each one of those components in its own right is such a powerful piece. You develop your deployments, your innovative ideas across that stack, and it's just such a strong message that we're sending out there. But yeah, I suppose we've covered quite a lot of ground now over the last sort of 45, 50 minutes or so, Martin. I guess, I mean, should we try and rewind and roll it back as to, okay, all this is great. I mean, we've gone on quite a diverse conversation here, and I mean, it's probably best to say none of this is scripted as well. So it's great to see that we've managed to get this far. But how do we? So let's roll it straight back now. So if we've got a viewer that's been with us for the last 50 minutes and they're sat there watching all this great stuff, what's your opinion, Martin? Where should they start? What should the first thing be if they've not done any of this and they're completely new to it? What would be your kind of first recommendation?
So the journey I always describe to customers, right, is culture for number one, people, process, and technology. What I mean when I say that is, once you get the culture right, that collaboration and communication right between your teams, that starts to drive the people that you have in your teams and the skill set that those people need, and how they really start to drive the business forward. Right? Culture, it's a bit of a fluffy word in a lot of ways, but you look at most organizations that have what we deem a good culture and they're extremely productive. Right? There's very few organizations that you would say the opposite of. So you get that culture right within your organization, that then starts to drive the people and skills and the knowledge that they need to be able to execute. Those people can then start to drive the processes that you need to be successful, the process changes that are needed to be successful. And then the icing on the cake, really, and what makes us go from running those processes manually to an automated way, is the technology. Fundamentally, the stuff we just gone through on the slide there, yes, it all sounds really good and impressive as separate items, but the power is when they're together. And normally we would run those things separately, individually, and we may run elements of it automatically. But what really makes it powerful is your pipelines that stick together that whole release and build experience together. And that's why when it comes to the technology in DevOps, there's so much emphasis on continuous integration and continuous deployment. But for me, you have to get the culture, people, and process right to start with.
I couldn't agree more with you, Martyn. And I don't know about you, but I think for our DevOps talk, I think that's probably a good place to end the conversation, unless you've got any other bits you want to throw in there, Martyn. But that's been phenomenal.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, thanks for having me again.
No, absolutely. So before we wrap up, there'll be one other quick question that I've got for you. What do you think your big bets are for the next 5 years, Martyn? I'm just going to throw that out there just to put you right on the spot. But have you got any little side projects you're working on, or something that you think, ooh, there's a glimmer of hope there in the future? I'd like to look at that. What's your big bets moving forward?
So no major side projects. I always seem to be 6 months or a year behind the idea that I then seem to find someone else has done.
You're not the only one.
Which is always disappointing. You think, damn, if only I'd have been 6 months.
If only I'd have done it then.
Yeah, if only I'd have done it when I thought about it.
Yeah.
So I honestly think the thing that's going to drive us forward, right? Everyone talks about every company is a software company now. And I think the next evolution of that is the realization that data is the be all and end all of business. Right? Data is what makes you make smart decisions as an executive board. It's what makes you architect customer solutions. You have good data, you come up with good solutions. Whatever walk of life you're in, data is what drives you, and the better ability that we have in the future to be able to surface that data quickly and tie in multiple data sets to visualize that data in a better way and interpret it in a better way is going to be extremely powerful. We're on the cusp of being there already, and there are some people that do these kind of things already and analyze data or huge data sets really, really quickly and get the data they need to make those decisions. But it is ultimately, I think, in the future, in the next 5 years, those companies that are able to utilize that technology to make those decisions quicker that will come out the other end better than when they went in.
I think that's a fantastic forward-thinking thing. I mean, data and AI, machine learning. I mean, Microsoft have got a number of things with Synapse and Databricks, and obviously now from a governance point of view, they released Purview just before Christmas. So I think I'm with you there, Martyn. A great thing to end on there. But no, brilliant. I mean, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I think that session's been fantastic, Martyn.
Problem.
Thank you for spending the time with me, Martyn. There's nothing more for me to say. So I've been John Lunn. That's been Martyn Coupland. Thanks for watching. If you like this, subscribe. If you've got any comments, please do feel free to reach out to either myself or Martyn. We've got our Twitter handles there on the screen, or drop a comment below. We'll happily come back to you and have a chat to you. But thank you once again, Martyn. And until next time, I've been John Lunn, a.k.a. Jonnychipz.